Not very long ago, in the north of England, people were certain that something was lurking in the shadows, watching from the darkest corners of the room, or from inside the cupboard under the stairs, waiting under your bed. They were the reason that bread and cheese vanished in the middle of the night, the cause of footsteps in an empty hallway. They were why children woke up screaming or unable to breathe. And if you packed up your things and left, well, it just came with you. Today, most people know the word Boggart as the cupboard-dwelling shapeshifter from children's books. Others may instead imagine the mischievous domestic sprite of Victorian folklore, but what if I told you that everything you thought you knew about Boggarts was wrong? What if behind this strange creature lies something far older and far stranger? Hi everybody, I'm Nick and welcome to Beasts of the Old World. If you're new here, this is a channel where we discuss ancient folklore and mythical creatures from across the globe. Today we'll be asking, what really is a Boggart? Why do they hate children so much? And why should you never, ever try to give one a name? As always, if you enjoy the video, giving it a like would be massively appreciated. And with that said, let's get into it. If you'd have asked someone in Lancashire 200 years ago what a Boggart was, they'd likely lower their voice before answering. Because in those days, Boggarts were considered to be very real, and worse than this, they were already in your house. Sometimes they helped out, tidying the hearth, churning the cream, but only if you treated them right. If you somehow insulted a Boggart, or mistreated one, or God forbid you tried to name one, well then, that's when things began to change. It might start off with the usual ghostly goings-on. The dog barking at empty corners of the room, the hallway suddenly growing cold, or lights flickering for no apparent reason. But you might also find that fresh bread would spoil overnight. New milk would inexplicably curdle. You might crack your eggs for your breakfast in the morning and find that they were empty. Children would cry when the sun went down, fearing the creature that lay in wait beneath their beds, fearing the moment it would crawl out to torment them, whisper to them from the darkness, put its cold, clammy hands over their faces, or sit upon their chests so that they struggled for breath. A Boggart could make your whole house unlivable. And that's exactly what happened to George Cheetham and his family, who lived in an old farmhouse near some ancient woodland in Manchester, a place still known today as Boggart Hole Clough.
The trouble all began for Cheetham family on a cold winter's night. For the wind howled outside, the hearth's fire crackled within, and so they gathered round, telling mirthy tales, their laughter echoing through rooms. But amidst their merriment, a most peculiar thing occurred. A small, shrill voice would join in with laughter, its source unseen. On this fateful night, Robert, the Cheetham's youngest son, named this unseen presence a fine little tyke. Alas, to name a Boggart is to invite its wrath, and from that night forth, the Cheetham's Boggart, once a hidden whisperer in dark, turned malevolent, plaguing young Robert with endless nights of mischief and torment. It began with strange laughter piercing the dead of night, a laughter belonging to none in the house. But far worse were the unseen hands what seized poor Robert while he tried to sleep, one moment grabbing him by feet and hauling him to bed's end, and the next dragging him back to his pillow by his ears. Night after night, instead of peaceful slumber, the house echoed with his screams and with dreadful, unexplained noises, leaving the Cheethams no peace or respite at all.
The Cheethams story is just one of the many guises of the Flit legend, a common Boggart tale across the north, in which a family are so plagued by the deeds of a Boggart that they threaten to leave the house in which they and the Boggart reside. Upon packing up and leaving the haunted house, George Cheetham and his family get only a little ways down the road before they hear the same shrill voice coming from within their luggage, and decide thereafter that they may as well turn back again to the old house as be tormented in another, not so convenient. Stories like this weren't told for fun. They weren't fairy stories for children. They were told because, as far as the people of the north were concerned, they were true. And worse still, it was the children who were most often affected. But before you scoff, imagine a world in which modern medicine is in its infancy, in which children often fell prey to strange illnesses and untimely deaths. Imagine the anxiety you must have had as a parent and how desperate you would be for any sort of explanation. Folklorist Ellen Walkinshaw, in her article Supernatural Pranksters in Lancashire, notes that
children generally were marked out as objects of dislike by their unearthly tormentor. The curtains of their beds would be violently pulled to and fro, and then a heavy weight, as of a human being, would press them nearly to suffocation, from which it was impossible to escape.
For Walkinshaw, that children are the primary victims in Boggart narratives is no coincidence. In the 1800s, 1 in 5 children died before their first birthday. 1 in 3 didn't make it to age 5. For many families, losing a child wasn't an imagined nightmare, it was an all too common reality. And when there was no explanation, when no doctor could help, people turned to stories. Of course they did. Stories gave the fear a name. They gave you a reason. So what were these things that we call Boggarts? Well, right off the bat, this is where things get slippery, because the closer you look, the harder they are to define. Traditionally, Boggarts were said to look like small sprite or goblin-like creatures, little twisted, clever-fingered things with spindly arms and tatty clothing, living in liminal spaces in the house, such as the cupboard under the stairs. But there's an issue here. This iconic image, the one I grew up with, as did many others like me, isn't really supported by the older sources at all. In these sources, we find something else entirely. Folklorist Dr. Simon Young is responsible for the most detailed modern research on Boggarts. In his Boggart sourcebook, he pulled together 27 early sources dating from 1790 to 1940. Sources he chose because they were written by authors with an understanding of local dialect. What he discovered was very revealing. In the older texts, Boggarts took the form of black dogs, monstrous hares, even spectral sheep. Many had no form at all, just a cold spot on the stairs or a whisper in the rafters, a weight on the chest as you tried to sleep. There are even texts in which scarecrows are described as Boggarts. Very few were described as goblins or sprites, and even fewer link them specifically to the home. Most curiously, out of all these texts, easily the most common definition of the term boggart was ghosts. Not fae, not goblins, ghosts. One source described the boggart as an evil spirit made visible. Another, something of an unearthly nature that is terrible to come into contact with. None of them really match up with our modern expectation. For Dr. Young, the word boggart, it seems, was a very broad term, describing any ambivalent or evil, solitary supernatural spirit. The iconic image of the creature in the cupboard under the stairs is, in reality, an invention of 19th century folklorists, a deliberate narrowing down of the boggart parameters, turning it into something that would be more accurately described as a hob or a brownie. The earliest boggarts weren't house spirits at all, they could be anywhere. They haunted lonely bends in the road, crouched under mossy bridges, and watched from the trees as travellers passed through marsh and fen. There are still places named after them even to this day. Blakely's Boggart Hole Clough we've already mentioned, but there's also Boggart Bridge in Burnley, the Boggart Stones on Saddleworth Moor, and countless houses and lanes all across the north. Each name an old warning, each one a memory of something half seen in the dark. And it's no wonder these stories grew, because in those days, long before electric light, before gas lamps, before even the faint glow of candles in every window was common, when the sun went down, England's countryside was dark. Utterly, unalterably dark. In this environment, the land itself took on a new aspect. In the 19th century, to walk a country lane after sundown was dangerous. When you couldn't see more than a few feet ahead of you, that strange noise that came from off behind the tree line was not as easily dismissed. You didn't shrug it off because you didn't have that luxury. If that sounds exaggerated, then try walking through your local woods at night without a phone or a torch and see how quickly your senses start playing tricks on you. That fear was very common, and boggarts, whatever they were, gave the fear a shape. They were the shadow in the wood, a thing you felt behind you that vanished the moment you turned to look. All this is well and good, but it gets us no closer to what a boggart really is. What do you call a creature with no clear form? One that might look like a goblin, or a black dog, or a ghost, or nothing at all. The only name that stuck was boggart, but that tells us very little. So it was that in the late 19th century, some folklorists tried to pin it down. They turned the boggart into a household sprite, a mischief maker, a trickster with chores. But the older stories don't fit into this neat little box. The boggarts of old shift and contradict. They slip through your fingers the moment you think you've understood them. And maybe that's fitting, because if there is one thing across all the towns and villages of the north that people agree on, even to this day, it's that you must never name a boggart. This was said to be the one thing that turned mischief into malice. The moment you gave the boggart a name, it turned on you. The Cheetham boy called his boggart a little tyke. Not even a name as such, just a label, but it was enough. From that moment on, it haunted him. Other tales speak of named boggarts like Old Hob, the so-called master of boggarts, a devilish being who summoned other boggarts to do his bidding. Once named, a boggart no longer fades into the walls. It no longer laughs unseen in the corners of the room. It actively seeks you out. It follows you. It torments you until you can take it no more. The question is, why? Why would naming this creature be so dangerous? Well, I searched and searched and I can find no explanation written down anywhere. So, here's a theory of my own. In many magical traditions, from European folklore to fantasy fiction, names hold power. Indeed, in some traditions, true names are the basis of magic spells. To know a thing's true name is to control it, to bind it. You see this perhaps most famously in the tale of Rumpelstiltskin. You see it again in Le Guin's Earthsea series, where names are closely guarded secrets. Because in those stories, to learn the true name of a being is to gain power over it. And Boggarts, well, they might just be the freest of all mythical beings you could point to. Think about it, they're amortal, so they don't fear death. They're not bound by shape or form, so they don't fear a cage. Given these qualities, surely, if they fear anything at all, it's that someone might try naming them. To name a boggart is maybe the only way to strip it of its autonomy. It boxes it in, it enslaves it. And that, I think, is the one thing they absolutely cannot bear. So what is a boggart? It's a nameless creature with many names. A formless being with a stolen, shape-shifting past. Once blamed for strange disturbances in the dead of night, and for illnesses that had no other explanation, especially in children. It's a creature shaped by the fears and the anxieties of the people for whom it was real. And that, strangely enough, may be the one thing that defines the boggart. Fear. It's not a creature with a single look or name, because it is our fear. Different according to each observer, and, of course, fear doesn't want you to name it. Doesn't want you to know it, because if you do that, well then you might just master it. And that will not do at all. For of all the mythical creatures in the world, this one is its own master. This one has no name.